I could feel the tension building even before I walked back through our apartment door that Sunday evening. The city was buzzing as usual, traffic lights reflecting off wet pavement, horns blending with the chatter of people spilling out of cafes. I had spent the weekend visiting friends a few hours away, laughing and unwinding, while my husband had flown back from an exhausting international business trip. In my head, I had been preparing for a warm reunion. Hugs, stories, maybe takeout from our favorite Thai place. Instead, as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed the heaviness in the air. He was standing at the kitchen counter, arms crossed, expression unreadable except for the furrow between his eyebrows. The fridge door stood open like a silent accusation. "No food," he muttered under his breath as I set my bag down. It wasn't a shout, not even an overt complaint, just a small comment. But there was weight behind it. The fridge wasn't literally empty, but I admit it wasn't full either. The shelves were sparse, a carton of eggs, some condiments, a half loaf of bread. Yet our freezer had a decent supply of meals I'd prepped weeks before: soups, chili, chicken, stir-fry, all stacked neatly in containers. And the pantry wasn't bare either. Pasta, rice, canned beans, tuna. It wasn't an ideal welcome home spread after a red-eye flight, sure, but it wasn't a desert. I glanced at him, trying to gauge whether he was joking. "You could have heated up one of the frozen meals," I offered lightly. "Or ordered something, there's a store on the corner." He shut the fridge door with a quiet thud. "It's just, after traveling halfway across the world, it would have been nice to have something fresh waiting." It sounded reasonable at first, but the way he said it like an expectation unmetted a nerve. I work a full-time job too. My weeks are packed with deadlines, meetings, and late nights. Grocery shopping had fallen to me over the years because I'm good at planning meals, not because we agreed it was solely my job. I do it about 90% of the time. He takes on other chores: laundry, trash, repairs. It usually balances out. But in that moment, standing in our kitchen, it felt like a silent audit of my effort. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just didn't get to the store before leaving for my trip." "There's still food, though." He gave a small, humorless laugh. If by food you mean frozen bricks and dry pasta, it was still more teasing than anger, but each comment chipped away at me. I could feel the weekend slipping from my fingers. Our reunion derailed by something as basic as groceries. Later that night, while he showered, I sat on the couch and thought back to how we'd ended up in this dynamic. When we first moved in together, grocery shopping had been a shared adventure. We'd go on Saturday mornings, coffee cups in hand, debating brands of olive oil or which cheese to try. Over time, as his travel schedule grew heavier and my work shifted to longer hours, those trips became mine alone. I'd slip into autopilot, make the list, grab the staples, plan meals for two. It wasn't a burden, exactly, but it was effort. And here we were now, at an impasse over eggs and frozen soup. When he came out of the bathroom, hair damp, I tried again. "Look, I get that you're tired, but I didn't intentionally leave you with nothing. You're not helpless. You could have ordered food or gone downstairs." His eyes met mine, weary but still sharp. "I just expected." He stopped himself, then shook his head. Never mind, but it wasn't never mind. The next morning, his jokes continued offhand remarks about fending for himself or starving husband syndrome. Each time, I felt my jaw tighten a little more. It wasn't funny anymore. Inside, I was battling two conflicting voices. One told me, He's exhausted. Give him grace. The other shot back, you're exhausted too. Why is this automatically on you? That inner debate colored every interaction. When I poured coffee, his sigh behind me felt like a commentary. When I packed my bag for work, his silence felt heavier than words. By midweek, I started replaying the entire scenario like a film reel. Me leaving town. Him arriving to an understocked fridge, the first jab, my defensive reply. The reel slowed on that moment, my response. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. Could I have shopped before leaving? Possibly. But the more I analyzed, the more I came back to the same point. We're both adults. We're both capable of making sure we're fed. Our city isn't some remote village. Within a 5-minute walk, you can get groceries, fresh sandwiches, hot meals. He'd managed on his own for years before we met. Why did this feel like a breach of contract now? That question gnawed at me during my lunch breaks. In the quiet of my office, I'd scroll through posts about relationships, housework, mental load. So many stories mirrored ours, one partner feeling unseen, the other feeling unappreciated. The comment sections were full of people taking sides, but no one captured the gray area I felt, wanting to be considerate without feeling taken for granted. One evening after work, I opened the freezer and pulled out one of the meals I'd prepped. Chicken stir-fry with vegetables, still vibrant under the frost. I heated it and set it on the table. When he came in, he looked surprised but said nothing at first. Finally, he sat down and said quietly, "I know I've been snappy. I was just so tired when I got back. I shouldn't have kept making jokes." His admission softened something in me, but it didn't erase the tension. "I know you were tired," I said, "but the jokes made me feel like I'd failed you. And I don't want to feel like your mother." He looked down at his plate. "I didn't mean it like that." We ate mostly in silence. The stir-fry tasted fine but felt heavy in my mouth. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the invisible threads that hold a household together. Shopping, cooking, planning, they're not just tasks. Their mental load. Maybe he hadn't realized how much of it I carried. Maybe I hadn't realized how much he expected it. It struck me that this wasn't really about food. It was about expectations, about partnership, about how easy it is to slip into roles without talking about them, and how jarring it feels when one of us breaks the pattern. I turned on my side and watched him sleep, his face softer in the dim light. Part of me wanted to wake him and talk, to hash it all out until we understood each other. Another part knew we needed time for his jet lag to fade, for my frustration to cool. The next day, I made a mental note. We need a real conversation, not half jokes and defensive comments. But not yet. Not while everything still felt raw. For now, I replayed the weekend in my head, scene by scene, as if I were telling it to someone else, some unseen audience who might judge me or validate me. Was I the unreasonable one, or was he? Or were we just two stubborn people caught in a small storm after a long week? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew the story wasn't over. When I think about how the tension escalated, it's like watching a slow-burn drama where the music gets a little louder with each scene. The first act was the fridge door swinging open and his muttered comment. The second act was the jokes little barbs thrown over coffee at dinner as if they were harmless. By the third morning, it wasn't a game anymore. He slid into the kitchen, hair sticking up from sleep, and said, "What's for breakfast?" Oh wait, nothing. It was half smile, half excuse. I put my mug down and finally snapped. "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've heard enough about the food thing." He blinked, taken aback. "I was kidding. It doesn't feel like kidding," I shot back. "It feels like you're trying to make me feel bad for not grocery shopping before you got home." The air thickened. It was one of those moments where time slows, both of us measuring how far we're willing to go. "I flew across the world," he said finally, "and came home to an empty fridge. Is it really so crazy to want something decent to eat?" "I work full-time too," I said, my voice trembling. "I left for a weekend. There's food in the freezer. We live in a city with restaurants on every block. You're not helpless." It was out now, everything I'd been thinking but holding back. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. "So you think I'm helpless?" "No," I said. "I think you're acting like it's my job to anticipate your every need." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, come on. It's not like that, isn't it?" Silence fell between us like a curtain. I walked out of the kitchen, hands shaking, and shut myself in the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms into my thighs, trying to ground myself. This wasn't about groceries. It was about the mental load I'd been carrying, the quiet expectation that I would manage the household details while he traveled. In the days that followed, the argument became a cold war. We spoke only when necessary, our conversations clipped and polite. He'd make himself toast or grab food out, and I'd stay later at work, avoiding the apartment. At night, we lay back to back in bed, an invisible wall between us. I replayed our fight in my head over and over. Could I have been more gracious? Maybe. Could he have been less passive-aggressive? Definitely. We were both stubborn, each convinced we were right. On Wednesday, I called my best friend, Mia, during my lunch break. She listened as I poured out the story, the fridge, the jokes, the fight. "Sounds like he was tired and wanted comfort," she said carefully. "But also like he's not seeing how much you do." "Exactly," I said. "I didn't mean to leave him high and dry. But I can't be responsible for every crumb he eats." Mia laughed softly. "Marriage is tricky. Everyone falls into roles without realizing it. Maybe it's time to renegotiate yours." Her words stuck with me the rest of the day. Renegotiate. We'd never really done that. We just drifted into patterns. That night, when I got home, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. An empty takeout container sat on the coffee table. I hesitated in the doorway, then took a breath. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up, wary. About all of this," I said, gesturing vaguely at the kitchen. "The food thing, the jokes, everything." He set his phone down slowly. "Okay." I sat on the opposite end of the couch, tucking my legs under me. "I didn't go to the store because I was leaving town too. I assumed you'd be able to handle a few meals yourself. I didn't mean to leave you with nothing. But the jokes you made, they made me feel like I was your mum who forgot to pack your lunch." He rubbed his hands together, eyes on the floor. I was exhausted. I guess I wanted to come home to something normal, like a stocked fridge. I didn't think about how it would sound. "I get that you were tired," I said. "But I'm tired too. I can't always plan everything. We're both adults. We need to figure out a better system." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his expression. "You're right. I didn't realize how much you were doing. I just expected." There it was, the word that had been hovering unspoken between us. Expected, We sat in silence for a long moment, both of us absorbing the weight of it. Then he said, "What if we split the shopping more evenly? Or at least talk before one of us travels?" Relief washed over me like a tide. "That would help," I said. "I don't mind doing it most weeks, but I need to know it's not all on me." He nodded. "And I'll stop making jokes about starving. They weren't funny." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a start. Over the next few days, we slowly thawed. He offered to pick up groceries after work. I stopped bristling every time he opened the fridge. We began to talk again, not about food, but about our days, our plans. The invisible wall in our bedroom started to crumble. One night, as we ate dinner together, he said, "You know, before I met you, I lived on takeout and cereal." I laughed. "I know, I've seen the receipts." "I guess I got spoiled," he admitted. "Maybe we both did." I said. That sparked a bigger conversation, one about division of labor, about expectations, about what we both wanted our marriage to look like. It wasn't easy. We both had to face uncomfortable truths that I sometimes overfunctioned, taking on more than I needed to, and that he sometimes slipping into dependence without realizing it. We decided to make a list of all our household tasks: grocery shopping, cooking, laundry, bills, maintenance. We each marked the ones we usually handled. The imbalance was obvious, but seeing it on paper made it feel like a problem we could solve, not a vague resentment. "I'll take on more of the shopping," he said, "and maybe we can cook together on weekends. Make it fun again." "I'd like that," I said. We also agreed on a simple rule: no jokes about chores as weapons. If something bothers us, we talk about it directly. No more passive-aggressive comments. It felt like a truce, but also a shift, like we were rewriting the script of our marriage. The next Saturday, we went grocery shopping together for the first time in months. The store was crowded, carts squeaking, kids running down aisles. But there was something comforting about being side by side, debating brands again, tossing items into the cart. It felt almost like those early days when everything was new. As we loaded the bags into the trunk, he glanced at me. "Thanks for pushing back," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "Pushing back?" "Yeah," he said. "If you hadn't, I wouldn't have realized how unfair I was being." I smiled. "You're welcome." Driving home, I looked out the window at the city streets, thinking about how small conflicts can reveal bigger truths. This one had started with a fridge, but it was really about partnership, respect, and the quiet expectations we carry. I wasn't sure yet whether I was the asshole in some internet-worthy sense, but I knew I wasn't wrong to stand up for myself. And I knew he wasn't wrong to want comfort after a grueling trip. We were just two flawed people learning how to live together. The strange thing about arguments like ours is how they linger. Even after the words fade and the routines resume, the echo remains a faint vibration in the space between you. It's as though the argument sits in the room with you, waiting to see if you'll address it fully or just sweep it under the rug. In the days after our truce, that echo slowly softened. We were back to sharing small jokes over coffee, not barbed ones, but real jokes, the kind that made us feel like teammates again. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't unsee the mental load I'd been carrying, nor could I unhear the expectation in his voice that first night. So one evening, a week after our grocery store détente, I decided to tell the story from the very beginning. Not to him, at least, not yet, but to myself, like a confession, or maybe a script. It began with his text, landed, exhausted, can't wait to be home. Then my weekend trip, the laughter with friends. The mental checklist I ignored because I wanted a break. The fridge, bearish but not empty. His face, drawn with jet lag, disappointment hiding under sarcasm. My defensive walls rising brick by brick. The fight, the silence, the truths. I wrote it all out one night at the kitchen table while he was asleep. By the time I reached the part where we made the list of chores, I realized something important. We'd both been playing roles we hadn't agreed on. I was the caretaker, he was the weary traveler. I stocked, planned, anticipated. He arrived, consumed, assumed. Neither of us had sat down to decide this it had just happened. That realization made me feel lighter, as if naming it gave me a way to release it. The next morning, over breakfast, I told him about my late-night writing. "I've been thinking," I said, "about how we divide things, about how we slid into these roles without talking." He looked at me with that careful expression he wore when he wanted to be open but wasn't sure what was coming next. And I think we should talk about expectations more. Not just groceries, but everything. Travel, bills, cleaning. I don't want to get resentful, and I don't want you to feel blindsided. He nodded slowly. I'd like that too. We made a ritual of it. Sunday evening check-ins. We'd sit with tea and go over the week ahead, who's working late, who's traveling, what groceries we need, what chores we can split. It felt awkward at first, almost corporate. But within a month it became natural, and a funny thing happened. The small irritations that used to spark fights over flowing trash, unwashed dishes, empty milk cartons, started disappearing. Not because we'd become perfect, but because we'd started anticipating them together instead of separately. I also started noticing changes in him. One evening, he came home with fresh produce, unprompted, and cooked dinner. Another weekend, he suggested a new recipe, something he'd seen online. These were small gestures, but they spoke volumes. It wasn't just him changing, either. I had to change too. I had to stop assuming responsibility for everything, stop martyring myself for invisible labor no one had asked for. If I wanted him to step up, I had to step back. It wasn't easy. There were moments I bit my tongue when I wanted to take over. Moments I forced myself to let him handle something his way, even if it wasn't how I would have done it. But each time I did, it felt like breathing a little deeper. We also started cooking together on Saturdays, like we'd planned. It became our new ritual. Music on, chopping vegetables, side by side, tasting sauces. We'd plan the week's meals, laugh about our terrible knife skills, debate whose playlist was better. Those afternoons felt like a return to something we'd lost, but also like something entirely new. One rainy Sunday, as we stirred a pot of soup together, he said, "You know, I used to think marriage was about finding someone who does all the things you don't want to do." I raised an eyebrow. "And now I think it's about finding someone who'll figure out the hard stuff with you." I smiled. "That's a better definition." He ladled soup into bowls. "I'm sorry again for the food thing, for the jokes, for assuming I'm sorry too," I said, "for letting it build up, for snapping." We clinked our spoons like glasses. A quiet toast that evening after dinner. I sat on the couch, scrolling through an online forum where people posted scenarios and asked strangers to judge them. I read stories of fights over chores, money, parenting, each one a tiny window into someone else's private storm. I wondered what strangers would think of ours. Would they call me selfish for not stocking the fridge? Would they call him entitled for expecting it? Would they say we were both stubborn? Maybe they'd be right on all counts. But as I looked across the room at him, stretched out reading, a soft smile on his face, I realized it didn't matter what strangers would think. What mattered was that we'd figured out our own ending, not a perfect one, but ours. Because the truth is, marriage isn't a neat story with heroes and villains. It's a messy, ongoing narrative full of small conflicts and small reconciliations. Sometimes you're the villain, sometimes you're the hero, and most of the time you're both just trying to do your best. In our case, the villain was a fridge that wasn't full enough and two people too tired to talk about it. But that conflict forced us to look deeper at how we were living. It forced us to rewrite our script. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real story isn't about who was the asshole, but about how we learned to stop playing characters we hadn't chosen and start co-writing our marriage instead. I closed my laptop and set it aside. The rain had stopped, and through the window the city lights glimmered like scattered stars. I thought about the weekend he came home, how disappointed he looked, how angry I felt. I thought about the list of chores, the Saturday grocery trips, the Sunday soups. I reached for his hand and squeezed it. "Thanks for figuring it out with me," I said softly. He squeezed back. Always. We sat there in the quiet, not as caretaker and weary traveler, not as plaintiff and defendant in some invisible trial, but as two people on the same side of the table. The fridge would fill and empty again. The pantry would cycle through supplies. One of us would travel, the other would work late. But now we had a new rhythm, a new agreement, to talk, to share, to check in before the cracks turned into chasms. And as I leaned my head on his shoulder, I realized something else. I wasn't the asshole. He wasn't either. We were just human, and that was enough.